Think about the last time you saw a pigeon, probably on a pavement somewhere, waddling after a dropped chip or scattering when you walk too close. We barely notice them. We call people bird-brained as an insult. A pigeon is just about the most ordinary animal on Earth. And yet, in a glass case, in one of the most famous museums in the world, the Smithsonian in Washington, there stands a single stuffed pigeon. He is missing a leg. He is missing an eye. And pinned beside him is a French military medal for bravery. Because just over 100 years ago, this one ordinary little bird flew straight through a storm of machine gun fire, torn half to pieces, to save the lives of nearly 200 trapped and dying soldiers. His name was Cher Ami. In French, that means dear friend, and this is his story. To understand what this bird did, we have to go to the autumn of 1918, to a dark, tangled forest in France called the Argonne. The First World War was in its final, desperate weeks, and in the middle of that forest was a group of American soldiers who were about to have one of the worst weeks any soldiers have ever lived through. They belonged to the 77th Division, a lot of them young men from New York City, immigrants and draftees, ordinary blokes who a year earlier had been working in shops and factories. They were led by a quiet, bookish officer named Major Charles Whittlesey, a lawyer in civilian life. Glasses, thoughtful, not the picture of a warrior at all. And on the 2nd of October, Whittlesey was ordered to attack forward into the Argonne. Here was the problem. He was told the French were protecting one side of him and other American units the other, so his men pushed forward hard and they broke through the German line. But the units that were supposed to be beside them had been stopped cold, and nobody told Whittlesey. So, his roughly 550 men suddenly found themselves alone, deep behind enemy lines, completely surrounded by German troops on the slope of a small ravine. History would call them the Lost Battalion. And for the next 5 days, that little pocket of ground became a nightmare. The Germans hammered them from every direction. Whittlesey's men had almost no food. They ran out of clean water and drank from muddy shell holes. Their ammunition dwindled. The wounded had no proper bandages and lay in the open, and the pile of them grew and grew. When the Germans sent a note demanding their surrender, the story goes that Whittlesey's answer was simply to keep fighting. But here was the deadliest problem of all. Nobody on the outside knew exactly where they were. Whittlesey desperately needed to get messages back to headquarters, to call for help, to correct the maps. And he had no radio, so he sent runners, brave men who tried to slip through the German lines on foot with a message. Every single one of them was killed, captured, or lost. The runners were gone, which left Whittlesey with one last way to reach the outside world. Birds. Carrier pigeons. Now, if that sounds strange, it shouldn't. In the First World War, before reliable radios, homing pigeons were one of the most important pieces of communication equipment an army had. A homing pigeon has an almost magical ability. No matter where you take it, it can find its way back to its own home loft, often over enormous distances. So the armies raised thousands of them. You'd carry the pigeons with you in a basket, write your message on a tiny slip of paper, roll it into a little capsule on the bird's leg, and throw it into the air. And it would fly home, carrying your words with it. Whittlesey's trapped men had a small basket of these pigeons. They were, quite literally, the only voice the Lost Battalion had left. And then came the worst moment of all. On the 4th of October, a barrage of artillery shells began to fall on the ravine. Huge, earth-shaking explosions, tearing through the trees and the men. But this artillery wasn't German. It was American. Their own side, miles away, working from bad coordinates, had no idea the Lost Battalion was there, and was dropping a full bombardment directly onto them. For an hour and a half, Whittlesey's men were being killed by their own army. Dozens died in those minutes. It was, somehow, even more horrifying than everything before. Whittlesey grabbed a scrap of paper and scrawled a message in shaking handwriting. The words are still famous today. "We are along the road parallel to 276-4. Our own artillery is dropping a barrage directly on us. For heaven's sake, stop it." He rolled it up, reached into the basket, and sent a pigeon. The Germans, who had learned exactly what those birds meant, shot it out of the sky. He sent another, shot down. The basket was nearly empty. And so it came down to the last bird they had left. A small, black-checkered pigeon named Cher Ami. They fixed the little canister to his leg with those desperate words inside. and they threw him up into the air, and every German gun in range turned on him. Cher Ami climbed into a sky full of bullets, and almost at once, he was hit. A round tore through his little breast, another struck him in the head and cost him an eye, and a piece of metal ripped into his right leg, the very leg carrying the message, and nearly severed it, leaving it hanging by a single thread of tendon, the canister still attached. The soldiers watching saw him tumble, falling toward the ground, and their last hope seemed to fall with him. And then Cher Ami did something that people who study animals still find genuinely hard to explain. He caught himself. That tiny, ruined bird beat his wings, pulled himself back up into the air and kept flying. Blinded on one side, shot through the chest, one leg dangling and half torn away, he pointed himself toward home, and he flew. 25 miles, in about 25 minutes. He did not stop, and he made it. Cher Ami dropped down into his home loft behind the American lines, more dead than alive, the message capsule still hanging from the shredded remains of his leg. The men there gently took the note, unrolled it, and read Whittlesey's words, "For heaven's sake, stop it." And the guns were called off. The friendly barrage went silent. It wasn't the end of the ordeal. The Lost Battalion had to hold on a while longer, but that message was a turning point. And a few days later, when rescue finally broke through to that ravine, of the more than 500 men who had marched in, only about 194 walked out. 194 men who went home and grew old and had children and grandchildren, and a great many of them owed that second chance, at least in part, to a pigeon. The army doctors were amazed the little bird was even alive, and they fought to save him. They couldn't save the leg, but the story goes that the soldiers, so grateful to him, carved Cher Ami a tiny wooden leg to stand on. He became the most famous bird in the American Army. The French government awarded him the Croix de Guerre, one of their highest honors for bravery, with a palm. When he was well enough to travel, he was carried home to the United States like a returning hero, personally seen off by the top American general in Europe. But Cher Ami never really recovered from that day over the Argonne. His wounds had been too severe, and on the 13th of June, 1919, less than a year after his great flight, the little pigeon died of the injuries he had suffered saving those men. He had given everything he had. They could not bear to simply let him be forgotten. So Cher Ami was carefully preserved and given to the Smithsonian, and there he still stands today, over a century later, a small, plain, one-legged pigeon in a glass case, watched by millions of visitors who stop and read his story and go quiet. So the next time a pigeon waddles past your feet after a scrap of bread and you barely give it a glance, just remember, we think of them as the least of all the birds, bird-brained, ordinary, beneath our notice. And yet one of them, small and gray and unremarkable, once flew through the worst that human beings could throw at him, broken and bleeding and half-blind, and refused to fall, because on the other end of that flight were hundreds of men who needed him. Dear friend, it's hard to think of a name that ever fit an animal better. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.